The sun was setting over the dry land when Eli Tanner rode into the small town of Silver Creek. His horse was thin, his hat was dusty, and the road behind him had been long and lonely. He was the kind of man people looked at once and forgot, a man who had seen too much of the hard world. He carried nothing more than an old saddlebag, a half-empty canteen, and $3 silver in his pocket. That was all he owned now, $3 and a lifetime of memories that no longer had a home. Eli tied his horse outside the trading post and stepped inside, hoping to buy a bit of grain and a cup of water. The air smelled of leather and smoke, and voices mixed with laughter and the sound of metal coins hitting wood. He walked quietly toward the counter, but something outside the window caught his eye. A crowd had gathered near a wagon. He moved closer and saw the reason why. A young Apache woman sat on the ground beside the wagon, her wrists tied together. Her face was tired, her hair tangled, and her clothes torn from travel. Yet even in that state, she had an air of quiet strength. She did not look down or beg. She simply looked beyond the crowd, her eyes cold and distant, as if she was somewhere far away in her mind. The man standing near her laughed as he shouted to the crowd that he was selling off the last of the prisoners. He spoke as if she were an object, not a person. Some men in the crowd looked curious, others looked away. No one said a word. Eli's chest tightened. He had seen many cruel things in his life, but this one struck him differently. He did not understand why, but something inside him told him he could not walk away this time. He pushed through the crowd and stopped near the wagon. "How much?" he asked quietly. The man turned to him and smiled in surprise. "You interested in her?" he said, laughing. "You don't look like a man with money." Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out the $3 silver. They glimmered in the sun. "It's all I've got," he said. "It's enough to buy her freedom." The crowd fell silent for a moment, unsure if they had heard right. The man chuckled. $3? That's hardly worth the trouble. But Eli didn't move. His eyes were calm, steady. "You want to be done with this business or not?" he said softly. $3 and she's free. No questions, the man shrugged. He had expected someone to bargain, not to mean it. "Fine," he said at last. "You must be crazy, cowboy." He took the coins, dropped them in his pocket, and waved his hand as if brushing off the dust. "She's yours, or free. Whatever you want to call it." Eli stepped forward and knelt beside the woman. He untied the ropes from her wrists slowly so she wouldn't flinch. Her skin was marked from the bindings, but she didn't cry out. She just looked at him, cold, uncertain, but curious. He offered his hand to help her stand, but she didn't take it. So he stepped back and gave her space. "Come on," he said quietly. "You don't owe me anything. You're free now." The crowd lost interest and began to drift away. Eli walked toward his horse, glancing over his shoulder to see if she followed. For a long time she didn't move. Then, without a word, she began walking behind him, slow and careful, keeping her distance. They left the town before dark, heading toward the open plain. The sky was wide and filled with colors of orange and red. Eli rode ahead, and the woman walked behind for miles without speaking. When the stars came out, he stopped near a patch of dry brush and built a small fire. He gave her a blanket and set out a bit of dried bread and water. She took them but said nothing. Eli didn't ask questions. He just sat by the fire, staring at the flames. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice quiet but strong. "Why?" she asked. He looked up. "Why did you do that?" Eli thought for a moment. "Because I couldn't walk away," he said simply. "Sometimes you see something that feels wrong, and if you don't stop it, it stays with you forever." She didn't answer. She just looked at him for a while, as if trying to understand him. Then she wrapped herself in the blanket and turned away. The desert night grew cold. Eli gave her his coat and lay down on the other side of the fire, using his saddle as a pillow. When he woke the next morning, she was sitting on a rock, watching the sunrise. The light made her face look softer, younger. She said her name was Nayeli, which meant "I love you" in her language. Eli nodded. "I'm Eli," he said, tipping his hat. "You got family somewhere?" She looked down. "Not anymore," she whispered. They packed their things and started walking again. Eli offered to let her ride the horse, but she shook her head. "He's your friend," she said. "You ride." So he walked beside her instead, leading the horse by the reins. For days they traveled across the dry land. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. Eli told her about his life, how he had been a ranch hand, how he had lost his home in a storm, how he had no one left waiting for him anywhere. She listened quietly. When he asked about her people, she said little, only that her village had been taken and she had been forced to follow strangers. Eli didn't ask more. At night, they made small fires and shared what little food they had. Eli noticed how Nayeli always saved half her portion, wrapping it in cloth. When he asked why, she said softly, "For tomorrow, in case tomorrow is worse." Her words stayed with him long after she fell asleep. One evening, as the wind blew softly across the plain, she asked, "What will you do when you reach the next town?" He smiled faintly. "Haven't thought that far. I guess I'll find work somewhere. Maybe mend fences. Maybe ride herd again." She looked into the fire. "And me?" she asked. Eli's smile faded. "You do what you want. You don't owe me anything, Nayeli. You're free to go wherever you want." She nodded, but her eyes looked sad. "Freedom," she said quietly, "is not so simple." The next day, they crossed a dry riverbed and reached a small spring hidden between rocks. Eli filled their canteens and let the horse drink. Nayeli stood by the water, staring at her reflection. She touched her wrists where the ropes had been. The marks were fading, but the memory wasn't. That night, Eli sat by the fire, thinking about how strange life could be. $3 had bought a life's worth of peace in his heart. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew he had done something that mattered. Nayeli sat across from him, the firelight dancing in her eyes. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. They both sat quietly under the stars, two souls from different worlds, sharing the same small circle of light in the vast, endless dark. Neither of them spoke again that night, but something had changed between them. Something built not on words, but on respect. When Eli finally lay down to rest, he glanced at her one last time. She was awake, watching the flames fade. For the first time in many years, Eli felt calm. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. He had not wasted his last $3. He had spent them on something no amount of gold could ever buy. Freedom and a piece of his own soul set right. The next morning, the air was cool, and the desert seemed softer under the golden light. Eli woke early, fed his horse a handful of grass, and looked around for Nayeli. She was sitting near the edge of the camp, wrapping her hair with a strip of cloth. She didn't turn when he spoke, but her voice carried through the quiet. "We should move before the sun gets too high," she said. Eli nodded and began to pack their few belongings. They started walking along the old trail that curved between low red hills. The land around them stretched far and wide, empty yet beautiful. Every few miles, Eli would glance back to see Nayeli following quietly behind him. Her steps were steady, her eyes always scanning the horizon. He had learned that she noticed everything. The tracks of small animals, the color of the sky, even the sound of wind moving through dry grass. By midday, they reached a small river. It was not much, just a thin line of water winding through rocks, but to them it looked like a gift. Eli let the horse drink while Nayeli washed her face and hands. She looked calmer than before, more alive. The water sparkled against her dark hair as the sunlight touched it. Eli looked away, not wanting to disturb her peace. They rested under a tree for a while. Eli tore a piece of bread in half and handed her a share. She took it with quiet thanks. After eating, she asked, "Why do you still travel with me? You could have gone to town and left me to go my way." Eli thought about it for a moment and then said, "Maybe because we both don't belong anywhere. Maybe walking together feels less empty than walking alone." For the first time, she smiled, a small, gentle smile that disappeared almost as quickly as it came. "You're a strange man, Eli Tanner," she said softly. "Most men would not do what you did." He chuckled lightly. "Most men never had only $3 left to lose." That evening, they made camp near a grove of mesquite trees. The fire crackled softly as the stars began to show. Eli took out his old harmonica and played a slow, quiet tune. Nayeli listened in silence, her face glowing in the flickering light. When he stopped, she said, "That song sounds sad." Eli nodded. "It is. It's about missing home." She looked at him for a long time before saying, "Then you are like me. You miss a home that no longer exists." The days passed slowly but peacefully. They traveled through canyons, across dry plains, and along narrow paths where the land fell away into valleys below. Sometimes they met riders passing by, but Eli always kept his hat low and Nayeli stayed quiet. Once they came upon an old woman living in a cabin by herself. She gave them water and a bit of dried meat, saying they looked like wanderers with kind hearts. Before they left, she pressed a small wooden cross into Nayeli's hand. "For protection," the woman said. Nayeli accepted it, though Eli noticed she didn't wear it. Instead, she tucked it into her pouch. One afternoon, when the wind was strong and hot, they saw dust in the distance. Riders. Eli's hand tightened on the reins. He knew trouble when he saw it. They quickly moved off the road and hid behind a rocky ridge. The riders passed not far from them, talking loudly. From their words, Eli guessed they were bounty men, searching for runaways. He stayed perfectly still, watching until they were gone. When it was safe, Nayeli looked at him with worry in her eyes. "They are looking for me," she whispered. "If they find me, they will take me again." Eli shook his head. "They won't find you," he said firmly. "I won't let them." She studied his face for a moment and then said quietly, "You would risk your life for me?" He smiled faintly. "Didn't I already spend all I had?" She wanted to argue, but his tone stopped her. For the rest of the day, they walked in silence, both lost in thought. That night, Eli's body ached from the long journey. As he sat by the fire, Nayeli brought him water and tore strips of cloth to clean a cut on his arm. He tried to stop her, saying it was nothing, but she insisted. "You helped me," she said. "Now I help you." Her hands were gentle, and Eli felt something in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Warmth. Later, as the fire burned low, she spoke again. "When I was taken from my village, I thought I would never be free again. I thought all people's hearts were cold. But you gave your last coins for me. I still don't understand why." Eli looked into the fire and said quietly, "Because I once knew someone who helped me when I had nothing. He told me, if you can't give much, then give good. Maybe that's all I did." The next morning, they climbed the last stretch of the trail that led to the northern hills. Beyond those ridges lay the land where some Apache families had escaped to start again. Nayeli said she might find her mother's cousin there, or at least others who spoke her tongue. When they reached the top, the wind blew through her hair, carrying the scent of pine trees. She stopped and looked at the open land below. "This is where our paths divide," she said softly. Eli didn't speak. He just nodded. He wanted to tell her she didn't have to go alone, but he knew this was not his choice to make. Freedom meant letting her decide. She took the small beaded bracelet from her wrist and placed it in his palm. "This was my mother's," she said. "She told me to give it to someone who saw me as a person, not a shadow. Now it is yours." Eli closed his hand around the bracelet. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "Then say nothing," she replied. "Just remember." She started walking toward the valley below, her figure small against the bright land. Eli watched her go until she disappeared among the trees. He stood there for a long time, holding the bracelet, feeling both proud and empty. When the wind changed direction, he turned and began to walk back the way they came. Days turned into weeks. Eli found work at a small ranch near the mountains, mending fences and breaking horses. He spoke little, worked hard, and slept under the stars. Sometimes, when the night was still, he would take out the beaded bracelet and hold it in his hand. He didn't wear it, but he kept it close to his heart, tied inside his hatband. The other cowhands noticed it once and asked where it came from. Eli only said, "From someone I'll never forget." Years passed, and the story of the cowboy who used his last $3 to buy a woman's freedom spread quietly through nearby towns. Some said he had saved her from a cruel fate. Others said she had saved him from the loneliness that had haunted his life. No one knew what became of the Apache woman, though a few travelers claimed to have seen her leading children by a river up north, teaching them songs in her language. Eli grew older, but he never left the ranch. On calm evenings, he would sit by the fence and watch the sky turn red. He often thought of that day in Silver Creek, how everything changed because he couldn't walk away. 3 silver coins had seemed small then, but they had bought more than freedom. They had bought purpose. Sometimes he imagined seeing Nayeli again, walking toward him across the fields, her smile soft and knowing. He would tip his hat and say, "You made it," and she would answer, "We both did, but those were only dreams." What was real was the quiet peace he carried in his heart. He knew he had done one true thing in his life. He had chosen kindness when it mattered most. When Eli's time finally came, The other ranch hands found him sitting under the old oak tree near the corral, the sun setting behind him. His hat rested on his knee, and inside the band was the small beaded bracelet. He was smiling faintly, as if remembering a promise kept long ago. People in the town still tell his story sometimes. The cowboy who spent his last $3 not to own a person, but to set one free. They say he never got rich, never built a house, never married. But when folks talk about the kind of man he was, they always end the same way. They say he wasn't just a cowboy. He was the kind of man who believed freedom had a price, and he paid it gladly.